Welcome to another deep dive. This time, we're diving into a story I bet many of you have heard of. The Spanish Armada.
A story that, even if you think you know it, has a surprising number of twists and turns.
It's one of those historical events that captures the imagination, isn't it? This clash of titans back in 1588.
Spain, the superpower of the age, versus England, an up-and-coming nation eager to flex its muscles on the world stage.
It really does set the stage for a dramatic showdown. So before we get into the heart of the action, let's paint a picture of what these two nations were like back then. What were some of the key differences?
Well, you have to remember that Spain at this time was deeply rooted in tradition. Their empire was vast, fueled by the riches flowing in from their American colony.
And they were fiercely Catholic, right? That played a big role in their worldview.
Absolutely. Catholicism was intertwined with their identity, their politics, everything. And then you have England, a nation undergoing some pretty radical transformations.
They were in the midst of the Protestant Reformation, breaking away from the Catholic Church. And economically, they were embracing new ideas, new ways of doing business.
Exactly. It was a time of upheaval and change in England, a real departure from the old feudal order that still held sway in Spain.
So right from the start, we have a recipe for conflict. Two very different nations with very different visions for the future. But what were the specific events that lit the fuse? What pushed these two nations to the brink of war?
Well, there were a number of factors, but one of the major flashpoints was England's support for the Dutch rebels. They were fighting a war of independence against Spanish rule.
So England was poking the bear a bit, supporting Spain's enemies right on their doorstep?
King Philip II of Spain definitely saw it that way. He viewed it as a direct challenge to his authority, a threat to the stability of his entire empire.
And then there's the whole pirate situation. English privateers, essentially state-sanctioned pirates, were wreaking havoc on Spanish shipping and settlements.
Ah, yes, those daring English sea dogs. Figures like Sir Francis Drake became national heroes, celebrated for their audacious raids on Spanish ships and treasure fleets.
Drake's raid on Cadiz in 1587 must have really gotten under Philip's skin. Didn't that raid delay the launch of the Armada by an entire year?
It did. Drake sailed right into Cadiz harbor and destroyed a huge amount of Spanish ships and supplies, setting their plans back significantly.
Talk about a bold move. And Drake's earlier exploits, like his circumnavigation of the globe, must have further fueled the rivalry. I mean, he captured so much Spanish treasure on that voyage that it more than doubled England's annual income.
That voyage was a real turning point. It demonstrated England's growing naval power and its ambition to challenge Spain's dominance on the world stage.
So we've got religious tensions, political maneuvering, and economic rivalry all simmering away. What was the final straw for King Philip? What finally convinced him to assemble this massive fleet?
Well, in 1588, King Philip decided he'd had enough of English defiance. He commissioned a massive fleet, over 130 ships strong, to crush English resistance once and for all.
This is the Invincible Armada we hear so much about.
Exactly. It was meant to be an overwhelming display of force, these towering galleons bristling with cannons laden with thousands of soldiers. It was a spectacle designed to shock and awe.
It must have seemed like an unstoppable force.
Yeah.
Did anyone at the time doubt that the Spanish would prevail?
Well, despite the outward confidence, there were some cracks beneath the surface. For one thing, the Armada's most experienced admiral, Álvaro de Bazan, died unexpectedly before the fleet set sail.
Oh wow, so right from the start they're dealing with a major setback.
He was replaced by the Duke of Medina Sidonia, a capable administrator but lacking in naval experience.
Talk about pressure. Suddenly thrust into command of this massive fleet with the weight of Spain's ambitions on his shoulders.
It wasn't an ideal situation, and this lack of decisiveness at the top would come back to haunt the Spanish later on.
So in May of 1588, this so-called Invincible Armada set sail from Lisbon. What challenges did they face early on?
Well, right off the bat, they encountered some rough weather, storms, logistical issues, the death of their top admiral. It wasn't exactly the smooth start they'd hoped for.
And I imagine the English weren't just sitting around twiddling their thumbs. They knew this massive fleet was heading their way.
You're right. The English, under the command of Charles Howard and Sir Francis Drake, were preparing for the inevitable confrontation.
Now, the English fleet was smaller, but they had some advantages up their sleeve, right? What was their strategy going into this clash of naval titans?
Well, they knew they couldn't match the Spanish ship for ship, so they focused on speed and maneuverability. Their ships were nimbler, able to outmaneuver those lumbering Spanish galleons.
And they also had a secret weapon, didn't they? Something that would prove decisive in the battles to come.
They did indeed. English cannons were superior to the Spanish guns. Longer range, greater accuracy, that would give them a crucial edge in the long-range duels that were to come.
So the stage is set for an epic showdown. Where did the first major encounter take place?
The first significant clash occurred off the coast of Plymouth in late July. It was a tense standoff, with both sides testing each other's strengths.
And knowing they couldn't go toe-to-toe with those larger Spanish ships, how did the English approach this first engagement?
They were smart. They avoided close-quarters combat, where the Spanish would have the advantage. Instead, they relied on hit-and-run tactics, using their superior speed and long-range guns to harass the Armada.
Classic David versus Goliath. Did this strategy prove effective?
It did. The English inflicted some damage on the Armada, forcing them to retreat further up the English Channel.
So round one goes to the English, but the Armada was far from defeated, right? What was their next move?
The Armada pressed on, hoping to link up with Spanish troops in the Netherlands and launch a full-scale invasion of England. But the English fleet, like a tenacious shadow, dogged their every move.
I bet there were some tense moments as these two massive fleets sailed up the channel.
There were skirmishes off the Isle of Wight, off Portland Bill, but despite their numerical superiority, the Spanish just couldn't break through the English defenses.
It sounds like the English were really dictating the terms of the engagement, always staying one step ahead.
You're exactly right. The Spanish found themselves reacting to English tactics rather than controlling the flow of the conflict.
So the Armada pushes on, hoping to rendezvous with the Duke of Parma's army in Calais. Did the English have one last trick up their sleeve?
They did. In a daring nighttime raid, they launched 8 fire ships right into the heart of the anchored Spanish fleet.
Wow. What were fire ships exactly?
Essentially, they were old ships loaded with explosives and set ablaze. A terrifying sight, especially in the dead of night.
I can only imagine the chaos that ensued.
It was a brilliant maneuver. The Spanish, panicked by these flaming hulks bearing down on them, cut their anchor cables and scattered, breaking their formation.
Leaving them vulnerable, I imagine. Did this set the stage for the decisive battle?
Precisely. The next day, the two fleets clashed in a fierce engagement off the coast of Gravelines, and this would prove to be the turning point of the entire campaign.
So tell us, what happened at the Battle of Gravelines that turned the tide so decisively in England's favor?
Well, the English, seeing that the Spanish were in disarray after the fire ships, they seized the moment.
So they really pressed their advantage.
Absolutely. They unleashed a relentless barrage on those scattered Spanish ships, taking full advantage of their superior firepower.
It must have been quite a sight, those English guns pounding away at the Spanish.
Oh, it was a fierce battle, no doubt about it. Spanish, despite their initial confidence, they were starting to realize this wasn't going to be the easy victory they had envisioned.
Yeah, I can imagine the morale on those Spanish ships plummeting as the English guns kept hammering them.
And at Gravelines, they were outmaneuvered, outgunned. Their hopes of landing an invasion force in England were dashed.
So the Battle of Gravelines, was that really the final nail in the coffin for the Invincible Armada?
It was. The Spanish fleet was battered, their supplies dwindling, casualties mounting. They had no choice but to retreat.
And they had to sail back to Spain the long way around, right? North around Scotland and Ireland.
Yeah, that's right. A perilous voyage, especially for a fleet in such a weakened state. And of course, the North Atlantic is notoriously stormy.
I imagine those storms added to their misery.
Oh, absolutely. They were battered by storms, suffered shipwrecks. It was a harrowing journey back to Spain.
And when they finally limped back to port, they were a mere shadow of the mighty force that had set sail a few months earlier.
A far cry from the Invincible Armada they'd set out to be. A humiliating defeat for King Philip and a stunning victory for England.
But the impact of this clash went far beyond just one battle, didn't it? It really had ripple effects across Europe and beyond.
Absolutely. It marked a turning point in the balance of power. Spain, while still a force to be reckoned with, they had been dealt a serious blow.
And England, they really stepped onto the world stage with this victory, didn't they?
Oh, without a doubt. The defeat of the Armada fueled their confidence, boosted their international prestige. It paved the way for their rise as a global empire.
So in a way, those English privateers who'd been harassing the Spanish for years, they actually played a key role in England's ascendancy.
They certainly did. Those raids, they weren't just a nuisance. They were chipping away at the foundations of Spanish power, exposing the vulnerabilities of their vast empire.
So it's like a chain reaction. One event triggering a whole cascade of consequences.
A domino effect. And you see it on both sides. Spain's defeat had a ripple effect across their empire, while England's victory propelled them to new heights.
Now, we've talked about the impact on England and Spain, but this was a geopolitical chess game with many players. Were there other nations whose fortunes were affected by the Armada's demise?
Oh, definitely. Remember Spain's war with the Dutch rebels? The Armada was supposed to play a role in crushing that rebellion.
Right. So what happened to the Dutch after the Armada failed?
Well, with the Armada out of the picture, they were able to consolidate their gains. They went on to secure their independence from Spain and emerge as a major maritime power in their own right.
So England's victory inadvertently helped create a new rival.
You could say that. The Dutch and the English would go on to have their own share of conflicts in the centuries that followed.
It's amazing how these events, they set off these chain reactions with consequences rippling outward across the world.
That's the fascinating thing about history, those unexpected connections, the unintended consequences.
We've talked about the political and economic fallout from the Armada, but what about the cultural and religious dimensions? Did those leave a lasting impact?
Oh, definitely. For England, the victory over the Armada, it became a symbol of national pride, of Protestant defiance against Catholic Spain.
So it really reinforced their identity as a Protestant nation.
Absolutely. And it fueled a sense of exceptionalism, this idea that England was a chosen nation destined for greatness. And that had a profound impact on their culture and politics in the centuries that followed.
It's incredible how a historical event can shape a nation's sense of self, almost like a collective memory that's passed down through generations.
And for Spain, the defeat, it was a blow to their national pride, their image as defenders of the Catholic faith.
So it really shook their confidence.
It led to a period of soul-searching. Some questioning Spain's role in the world, their commitment to this vast, far-flung empire.
So we see these enduring impacts on both sides, shaping their identities, their places in the world.
It underscores the idea that the Spanish Armada was much more than just a naval battle. It was a clash of civilizations, a clash of ideologies.
A pivotal moment in history, with repercussions that are still felt today. Now, thinking about this in a broader context, what are some key takeaways from the Armada story that still resonate with us today?
Well, one that stands out is the importance of adaptability. The English, they recognized the limitations of traditional naval warfare, and they weren't afraid to try new things.
They were innovators, weren't they?
They were. They developed new tactics, embraced new technologies, and that willingness to adapt was crucial to their victory.
And it's a valuable lesson for anyone, in any field. Sometimes you have to be willing to challenge the status quo, think outside the box to achieve success.
Exactly. And another key takeaway is the importance of understanding your opponent. The English, they had a keen grasp of Spanish intentions, Spanish vulnerabilities, and that allowed them to exploit those weaknesses, to develop effective counter-strategy.
Knowledge is power, as they say. So adapt, be knowledgeable. Any other timeless lessons we can glean from this 16th century clash?
Well, I think the Armada story also highlights the importance of resilience. I mean, the English faced a formidable foe, but they never gave up. They faced setbacks, they weathered storms, but they kept fighting.
That grit, that determination, it was a crucial ingredient in their victory, wasn't it?
Absolutely. And it's a reminder that even the best laid plans can go awry. You have to be able to adapt to changing circumstances, to bounce back from adversity.
So we have adaptability, knowledge, resilience. Timeless lessons from a 16th century naval battle that are still relevant in the 21st century.
History might seem like something from the past, but it's full of insights that can inform our actions or decisions today. And that's what makes studying history so rewarding.
It's about connecting those dots, seeing those patterns, understanding the forces that shape our world. And we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive. The lead up to the conflict, the clash of fleets, the far-reaching consequences. But there's one more angle I'd like to explore.
Oh. What's that?
It's about the lasting legacy of the Spanish Armada. Even centuries later, this event continues to capture our imaginations. Books, movies, countless works of art have been inspired by this clash. Why do you think this story, in particular, still resonates so strongly with people today?
Well, I think it's because it has all the elements of a great story.
It does. Heroes and villains, triumph and disaster, those larger-than-life figures like Drake and Philip II.
And that classic underdog story. A smaller, less powerful nation standing up to this seemingly unstoppable force. And against all odds, they win. That's a story that never gets old.
Yeah, it's inspiring. And it speaks to that human desire to root for the underdog, to see courage and resilience triumph in the face of adversity.
And let's not forget the setting, the high seas, those epic naval battles. It's a visually stunning story full of action and adventure.
Yeah, it really captures the imagination. And it's more than just a good yarn, isn't it? I think it also touches on some deeper themes.
Like what?
Well, the struggle for power, the rise and fall of empires, those big sweeping forces of history that shape the destiny of nations.
It's a reminder that the world is in constant flux, that nothing stays the same forever. Even the mightiest empires can fall.
And it's a story about human choices, about the decisions that leaders make and the consequences that ripple outward, sometimes for centuries.
And those choices, they often have unintended consequences, don't they? Things don't always go according to plan.
Yeah, like that domino effect we were talking about earlier.
Yeah.
One event can set off a whole chain reaction, leading to outcomes that nobody could have foreseen.
And at its heart, I think it's a story about the human spirit. The English, facing this seemingly impossible challenge, they refused to give in. They adapted, they innovated, and ultimately, they prevailed.
And that's a powerful message for us today, isn't it? That even in the face of adversity, we have the capacity to overcome obstacles, to achieve incredible things.
That's a message that never loses its relevance. We all face challenges in our lives, and sometimes it feels like the odds are stacked against us.
But the Armada story reminds us that we have that inner strength, that resilience, to keep going even when things get tough.
It's about finding that courage to face the unknown, to embrace the challenges that life throws our way,
And maybe, just maybe, to emerge from those challenges stronger and wiser.
to write our own stories of triumph, just like those English sailors who defied the odds and changed the course of history.
And who knows, maybe centuries from now, people will be looking back at our time, marveling at the stories of resilience and innovation that we're creating today.
It's an exciting thought, isn't it? That we're all part of this ongoing human story, this grand narrative that unfolds over generations.
So let's embrace that spirit of adventure, of curiosity, pushing the boundaries of what's possible.
And let's learn from those who came before us, from their triumphs and their failures.
Because history isn't just about the past. It's about understanding who we are, where we've come from, and what we're capable of becoming.
Well said. And on that note, I think it's time to wrap up our deep dive into the Spanish Armada.
Thank you so much for joining us on this incredible journey through history.
It's been a pleasure exploring this fascinating chapter of the past with you.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep discovering the amazing stories that history has to tell.